I used to believe love was enough. That's the thing about beliefs. They shatter so quietly you barely hear them break. Each crack forms slowly, like ice spreading across a winter lake, until one day you look down and realize you're standing on something that could give way at any moment. I'm Michelle, and at 33, I've learned that sometimes the hardest truth isn't losing someone you love. It's realizing they stopped trying to love you back long ago. The realization doesn't hit you all at once. Instead, it seeps in slowly, like water through limestone, gradually dissolving everything you thought was solid. The moment it finally crystallized for me wasn't during one of our countless silent dinners, or even during those long nights lying next to a man who felt miles away despite being inches from me. No, it was on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning, watching Adam mechanically sip his coffee while scrolling through his phone, his presence in our kitchen about as emotional as a piece of furniture. The sunlight streaming through our windows caught the edge of his wedding ring, the same ring I'd slipped onto his finger 4 years ago, with hands trembling from joy rather than doubt. I remember thinking how strange it was that something could look exactly the same on the outside while being completely hollow within. Kind of like our marriage, I suppose. 4 years of memories echo through these walls, but now they feel more like ghosts than comfort. The irony doesn't escape me that I'm sitting in the same kitchen now. Divorce papers spread across the table like fallen leaves, each page representing another dead branch of what I thought would be an evergreen love. My hands tremble as I arrange them in perfect order, each movement precise, as if somehow making these papers neat will make this ending easier to bear. They say hindsight is 20/20ths, but that's too simple. Hindsight is more like watching a movie for the second time. Suddenly you see all the foreshadowing you missed, all the red flags that were waving in plain sight while you were too caught up in the story to notice. Every "not tonight, I'm tired" becomes a brick in a wall that was being built between us. Every dismissed attempt at connection becomes another step toward this moment. The house is quiet now, save for the soft ticking of the clock Adam insisted on hanging, a wedding gift from his mother. It marks time with the same steady rhythm it always has, unaware that it's now counting down the final hours of our marriage, rather than marking another day of our life together. In my hands, I hold the final piece of paper that will set this all in motion. My signature still fresh, the ink barely dry, like a wound that hasn't had time to scab over yet. Looking back, I can trace the death of our marriage like a detective working backwards from the scene of a crime. The clues were there all along, scattered through the years like breadcrumbs leading to this inevitable conclusion. But when you're living in the glow of what you think is perfect love, it's amazing how blind you can be. I met Adam at a friend's gallery opening 5 years ago. He stood out immediately, not just because he was the only person who seemed as out of place as I felt among the avant-garde crowd, but because of how he carried that discomfort with such charming self-awareness. While others pretended to understand the merit of blank canvases selling for thousands, Adam leaned over and whispered, "I'm pretty sure my nephew's finger painting has more artistic depth." His laugh was infectious, his smile genuine, and his eyes. God, his eyes held such warmth when he looked at me. I remember thinking I'd never get tired of being the reason those eyes crinkled at the corners. Our courtship was a whirlwind of perfectly planned dates and spontaneous adventures. We'd stay up until dawn, talking about everything and nothing, making plans for a future that seemed as bright and endless as those summer nights. He'd surprise me with coffee at work, leaving little notes that I kept in a box under our bed. A box I haven't opened in over 2 years now. The proposal was everything I'd dreamed of, and more importantly, it felt inevitable. Like we were characters in a story moving naturally toward our happy ending. Adam had arranged a scavenger hunt through all our favorite spots in the city, each location holding a memory and a clue to the next. The final destination was the rooftop garden where we'd had our first kiss. He'd lined the path with candles, and as the sun set over the city, he got down on one knee and promised me forever. Our wedding was small but perfect. We wrote our own vows. His made everyone cry, including himself. "I promise to choose you every day," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "To love you, not just in the big moments, but in all the small ones in between." I remember thinking how lucky I was to have found someone who understood that love isn't just about the grand gestures, but about the quiet moments too. The first year was beautiful. We were that couple that made others roll their eyes with our constant displays of affection. We had inside jokes, secret smiles, and the kind of connection that made everything feel possible. Even our arguments ended in laughter and lovemaking. We were building a life together, piece by piece, and every day felt like a gift. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. It was subtle at first. So subtle I can't even pinpoint when it began. Maybe it was when Adam got his promotion and started working longer hours. Or perhaps it was when I started my photography business and our schedules began to clash. The changes were small, almost imperceptible. A missed good morning kiss here, a forgotten anniversary there. Date nights became increasingly rare, replaced by nights of parallel living. Him gaming in his office while I edited photos in mine. The inside jokes started to fade, replaced by inside silences. Those secret smiles became secret sighs. The connection that had once felt unbreakable began to stretch thin, like a rubber band being pulled too far. We were still going through the motions of marriage, but the music had stopped, and we were just mechanically dancing to the memory of a song. I remember the first time I really noticed something was wrong. We were at a friend's wedding, watching the couple exchange vows that sounded eerily similar to our own. Adam squeezed my hand during the ceremony, but when I looked up at him, his eyes were distant, already somewhere else. That night, as we drove home in silence, I realized I couldn't remember the last time he'd looked at me the way the groom had looked at his bride. The thing about watching your marriage crumble is that it happens in slow motion. You see the cracks forming, and like someone desperately trying to hold water in cupped hands, you try everything to keep it from slipping away. I became an expert at making excuses. He's stressed about work. We're just in a rough patch. All couples go through this. Every rationalization was a bandage over a wound that kept getting deeper. I started small, trying to recreate the magic of our early days. I'd leave little notes in his laptop bag, just like he used to do for me. "Miss your smile," I'd write. Or, "Remember that time we got caught in the rain at the pier?" The notes would come back home untouched, sometimes crumpled at the bottom of his bag, my attempts at connection becoming literal trash. Still, I persisted. I planned date nights, researching new restaurants and events that might spark his interest. "There's this new fusion place downtown," I'd say, trying to keep my voice casual, hiding the desperate hope beneath. "They do that spicy Korean chicken you love." Most times, he'd barely look up from his phone. "Maybe next week," he'd mumble, or, "I'm not really in the mood for Korean." Next week never came, and his mood never changed. I even took up his hobbies, forcing myself to learn about gaming, something I'd never been interested in before. I spent hours watching YouTube tutorials, learning the terminology, trying to understand this world that seemed to captivate him more than I could. One evening, I worked up the courage to knock on his office door during one of his gaming sessions. "Want to teach me?" I asked, holding up a second controller, my heart pounding with the fear of rejection. He looked surprised, then almost annoyed. "It's kind of complicated," he said, turning back to his screen. "And I'm in the middle of a raid." "I could watch," I offered, hating how small my voice sounded. "Maybe another time." Another time. It became the theme song of our marriage, a constant refrain of delayed connection, postponed intimacy, deferred love. The physical distance grew alongside the emotional one. Our good morning kisses, once deep and lingering, became perfunctory pecks, then faded entirely. Hugs felt mechanical, like embracing a mannequin. In bed, the space between us might as well have been an ocean. I'd lie awake, listening to his steady breathing, remembering when we used to fall asleep tangled in each other's arms. One night, after what felt like the 100th, "Not tonight, I'm tired," I decided to address it head on. I'd spent hours rehearsing my words, determined to be calm, rational, loving. I wanted to open a dialogue, not start a fight. "Adam," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart, "can we talk about us?" He sighed, the sound heavy with irritation. "What about us?" "I miss you," I said simply honestly. "I miss us. We barely touch anymore, barely talk. It feels like we're roommates, not spouses." "Michelle," he said, with the patronizing tone of a kindergarten teacher explaining why you don't eat glue, "I don't owe you anything in terms of affection." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You're kidding, right?" "No, I'm your husband, not your object." His tone was so self-assured you'd think he'd just solved world hunger. "You need to stop being so needy." Needy. The word echoed in my head like a slap. Wanting basic emotional connection from my husband made me needy? I sat there, stunned, wondering how the man who once wrote me poetry about my smile could now make me feel ashamed for wanting him to look at me. But I wasn't ready to give up. I suggested counseling, researching therapists who specialized in marriage counseling. I found one with great reviews just 15 minutes from our house. When I brought it up, Adam laughed. Actually laughed. "Therapy isn't going to make me want to spend time with you more," he said, as if the very idea was ridiculous. "Why can't you just accept that this is how marriage evolves? Not everything has to be about emotional connection." That night, lying in our bed that felt too big and too empty, I realized something that should have been obvious months ago. You can't save a marriage alone. It's like trying to clap with one hand. No matter how hard you try, it takes two to make the sound. Still, I made one last attempt. I booked the therapy session anyway, hoping he'd change his mind. He didn't show up. I sat in the therapist's office alone, crying as I finally admitted out loud what I'd been denying for so long. My marriage was dying, and I was the only one trying to save it. They say rock bottom has a basement. I discovered that truth one rainy Sunday morning when Adam walked into our living room with a smile that could light up Times Square. The same smile that used to make my heart skip beats now only made it sink. Something about that expression, so bright yet somehow hollow, sent warning signals through my body before he even opened his mouth. "So," he began, sitting down like he was about to pitch me a business proposal, "I've been thinking maybe we should start trying for kids." The coffee I'd been sipping caught in my throat. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him, or that this was some cruel joke. But no, he sat there, smiling that empty smile, waiting for my response as if he'd just suggested we try a new restaurant. "Kids?" I managed to choke out. "Are you serious?" "Yes, Michelle, we're not getting any younger, and it's the next logical step." He said it so matter-of-factly, like he was discussing a home improvement project, rather than bringing new life into our crumbling marriage. Logical step. The words felt bitter on my tongue. "Adam, we barely talk anymore. You can't remember the last time we had sex. You really think now's the time to have a baby?" His smile faltered, but he quickly recovered. "Well, maybe that's something we can work on." The audacity of those words, "something we can work on," hit me like a physical blow. After months of rejection, of watching him dismiss every attempt I'd made to salvage our relationship, now he was suddenly willing to work on it because he wanted something. The realization made me physically ill. I left the room before I could say something I'd regret, but my mind was spinning. That night, lying in our bed that felt more like a battlefield than a marriage bed, I stared at the ceiling and really thought about what he was suggesting. Having a child wasn't just a logical step. It was a lifetime commitment. The idea of bringing a child into a marriage where one partner was so completely checked out wasn't just depressing, it was terrifying. I imagined a future where our child would grow up watching their father treat their mother with the same cold indifference I'd become accustomed to. Would they learn that love means settling for crumbs of affection? Would they think it's normal for marriages to be devoid of warmth, of touch, of genuine connection? The thought of that future broke something in me. Maybe it was the last thread of hope I'd been clinging to. Or maybe it was the final illusion that things could somehow get better. Whatever it was, its breaking brought clarity. The next morning, I called a lawyer. What followed was a week of intense self-reflection. I went through old photos, read old messages, traced the timeline of our relationship's decay. It was like performing an autopsy on a marriage that had been dead longer than I'd been willing to admit. Each memory I examined revealed another sign I'd missed, another red flag I'd ignored. There was the Christmas party 2 years ago, where Adam had spent the entire evening networking with his colleagues, leaving me to make small talk with strangers. I'd felt so alone in that crowded room, watching other couples laugh together, share inside jokes, casually touch. When I'd mentioned it later, he'd dismissed my feelings. It was a work event, Michelle, not a date night. Then there was my photography exhibition last spring. I'd been featured in a local gallery, a huge milestone for my business. Adam had shown up an hour late, spent 20 minutes glued to his phone, then left early, claiming he had an important email to send. I'd stood there, accepting congratulations from strangers, while my husband's empty spot beside me felt like an open wound. The more I remembered, the more I realized how long I'd been making excuses for his behavior, how deeply I'd internalized the idea that wanting basic emotional connection made me needy. I'd spent years shrinking myself, trying to take up less emotional space, apologizing for having normal human needs. But the real breakthrough came when I started talking to friends and family about what was happening. Their reactions, shock, anger, concern, helped me see how abnormal my normal had become. My best friend burst into tears when I told her about the therapy session I'd attended alone. My brother, usually so calm, turned red with anger when I described Adam's dismissive attitudes. "Michelle," my friend Julie said during one particularly tearful lunch, "when was the last time you felt truly happy in your marriage?" I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it again. The silence that followed was deafening. I couldn't remember. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt truly happy with Adam because it had been so long ago. By the end of the week, I had divorce papers drafted and ready to go. I wasn't playing games anymore. This wasn't another attempt to get his attention or spark change. This was me finally choosing myself. The morning I planned to give him the papers, I woke up early and stood in front of our bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me was different from the one who'd tried so desperately to save her marriage. There was a strength in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a certainty in her posture that spoke of decisions made and lines drawn. When I handed him the papers, his reaction was exactly what I'd expected, and yet somehow still surprising. He held them like they were radioactive, his face cycling through expressions like a slot machine. Shock, anger, disbelief, fear. "Michelle, what the hell is this?" he asked, though we both knew exactly what it was. "It's a divorce petition," I said flatly. "I've thought about this long and hard, and I think it's the best thing for both of us." He blinked, clearly not expecting me to actually follow through. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." For the first time in what felt like years, Adam didn't have a dismissive response. Instead, he just sat there, staring at the papers in silence. It was almost funny. Now that I was finally walking away, he seemed to be really seeing me for the first time in years. Over the next few days, Adam went from shocked to full-blown hysterical. There were tears, arguments, and the occasional guilt trip. "I thought you loved me," he said at one point, his voice cracking. "I do love you," I replied, surprising myself with how steady my voice was. But love isn't enough if there's no effort from both sides. I started packing my things, determined to leave the house as soon as possible. That's when the real Adam emerged. One evening, as I was boxing up my books, the ones that had lined our shelves like promises of quiet Sunday afternoons we'd never actually spent reading together, he appeared in the doorway wearing his old workout clothes, the ones from when we first met, when he used to care about more than just his gaming console. "Michelle," he purred, leaning against the doorframe. "Maybe we could give this another shot. I'll make more of an effort." I'll admit I hesitated. For a brief, fleeting moment, I thought maybe he was serious this time. Maybe he'd finally realized what he was losing. But then reality smacked me in the face. Where had all this effort been for the last 2 years? And more importantly, why did it take divorce papers to get him to care? "Sorry, Adam," I said, stepping past him. "You're a little late." His jaw dropped. "You're really going to throw this all away?" "No," I said, turning to face him. "You already did." If my story resonates with you so far, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your support means the world to me, especially as I share such personal moments. Let's get back to it. After that night, Adam pulled out all the stops. First came the sudden interest in spending time together. Invitations to dinner, suggestions for movies we could watch. Even a hint about that vacation we'd always talked about but never taken. Then came the emotional pleas, the late-night texts full of memories and promises. Finally, my personal favorite, the guilt trips. "You're abandoning me," he sobbed one morning as I packed the last of my clothes. "I gave you the best years of my life, Michelle." I zipped my duffel bag and looked him dead in the eye. "Adam, you gave me exactly what you thought was enough to keep me around. Let's not rewrite history." His tears stopped instantly, and his expression hardened. Fine. Leave. You'll regret this. Ah, there it was. The classic, "You'll never do better than me" speech. I shrugged, slung the bag over my shoulder, and walked out. For once, I didn't look back. I spent the first few nights in a hotel, which wasn't ideal, but it gave me the space I desperately needed. The room was small and impersonal, but there was something freeing about being surrounded by neutral territory, spaces unmarked by memories or broken promises. I changed all my passwords, sorted through our joint accounts, and made sure Adam wouldn't have access to anything he wasn't entitled to. The lawyer had been clear: keep things clean, keep things fair, but most importantly, keep things smart. A few days later, my brother called. "Come stay with me," he said. "I've got plenty of room, and honestly, it'll be good for you to be around family." By the weekend, I was back in my hometown, crashing at his place while I figured out my next steps. It felt surreal. The house we'd shared, the life we'd built, it was all behind me now. But with each passing day, I felt lighter, as if I'd been carrying a weight I hadn't even realized was there. But of course, Adam wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The text started first. "I miss you. Can we talk? I know I messed up. Please just give me one more chance. This isn't who we are, Michelle." I didn't respond. My lawyer had advised me to limit communication, and honestly, I didn't want to get sucked back into his web of manipulation. But then came the voicemails, each one more desperate than the last. "Michelle, please, I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Just come home." Home. That word stuck in my throat. That house hadn't felt like home in years. About a week later, Adam's attempts to fix things hit a new low. My brother and I were sitting in the living room catching up when my phone buzzed. It was a picture from Adam. I hesitated before opening it, and when I finally did, I almost dropped the phone. It was him at the gym, clearly having started working out again, with a caption that read, "Let's celebrate a fresh start." My brother glanced at the screen and burst out laughing. "Wow, he's really pulling out all the stops, huh?" "Yeah," I muttered, deleting the photo. "He's nothing if not persistent." By the end of the month, I had my own place. A small apartment with just enough room for me and my thoughts. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The walls were blank canvases waiting for new memories, and the silence was peaceful rather than painful. I started focusing on my photography business, reconnecting with old friends, and figuring out who I was outside of being Adam's wife. One night, while scrolling through social media, I noticed Adam had posted a picture. He was out with some friends, smiling like nothing had happened. The caption read, "Here's to new chapters." I couldn't help but laugh. For someone who'd claimed he couldn't live without me, he sure looked fine. But then again, appearances had always been Adam's specialty. That's when I got the call from Julie. Julie and I had been close for years, and while she wasn't one to gossip, this time she couldn't resist. "Girl, you'll never guess who Adam's dating now," she said, her voice barely containing laughter. I sighed. "Do I even want to know?" "Oh, trust me, you do. This girl, she's something." That something turned out to be a girl named Tracy, who Julie said had been hanging around Adam's gaming circles for months. I did a quick social media search and found Adam's latest post. The two of them posing in front of her house, all smiles. She was wearing a crop top that said, "Living my best life," and had the kind of Instagram-perfect pose that screamed, "Influencer wannabe." The timing of it all felt too convenient, too quick. But I pushed the thought aside, telling myself it didn't matter anymore. Then came the dinner that changed everything. I was at a local brewery, enjoying a flight of craft beers and the simple pleasure of being alone with my thoughts, when he walked in, tall, with dark hair and an easy smile, wearing a well-worn leather jacket that said, "I'm comfortable in my own skin." His name was Samuel, Sam, and our conversation flowed like we'd known each other for years. But it wasn't until our first proper date at a cozy Italian restaurant that the final piece of my marriage's puzzle fell into place. When I showed Sam the photo of Adam and Tracy, his expression shifted. "Wait a second," he said, handing my phone back. "I know her. And them. Together. From months ago." My heart stopped. "What do you mean, months ago?" "I mean," he said, lowering his voice, "I saw them together at parties, looking very much more than friends. This was way before you said your divorce even started." The truth hit me like a tidal wave. All those late nights, gaming, the guarded phone, the emotional distance. It wasn't just withdrawal, it was infidelity. Adam hadn't just checked out of our marriage, he'd found his exit strategy long before I'd found my courage. Strangely, this revelation brought more relief than pain. It was the final confirmation that I'd made the right choice, that I wasn't crazy for feeling abandoned, that my instincts had been right all along. Looking back now, I realized that what felt like an ending was actually a beginning. Every tear I shed wasn't just grief for what I'd lost. It was water nourishing the ground where something better would grow. With Sam, I'm learning what real connection feels like again. We take things slow, both carrying our own scars, but there's an honesty between us that feels like fresh air after years of breathing stale lies. Sometimes the hardest chapters of our lives become the ones that make us realize just how strong we've been all along. Freedom isn't just about leaving something behind. It's about rediscovering who you are when you stop defining yourself through someone else's eyes. I still have the divorce papers tucked away in a drawer. Not as a reminder of failure, but as proof of my courage. They tell me that I was brave enough to walk away from less than I deserved to make room for everything I'm worth. And that, perhaps, is the greatest love story of all, learning to choose yourself. To anyone out there feeling trapped in a one-sided relationship, questioning your worth, or gathering the courage to choose yourself, you deserve more than crumbs of affection. Your heart knows the truth long before your mind is ready to accept it. And trust me, the day you finally choose yourself isn't the end of your story. It's just the beginning of a better one. Thank you for letting me share my journey with you. If this story touched you, please subscribe to join our community of survivors and thrivers. Remember, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away, and the strongest thing you can say is, I deserve better.